Welcome into the ABCFB podcast. My name is Andrew Garrison. I represent the A in the ABCFB acronym. That's Brooks Wyatt. He represents the B, and the rest is college football. That's what we're discussing today and every episode. My screen might be frozen. We're in quite a predicament right now in terms of connection. Brooks, I'm in Bloomington. You're back in our hometown. My house, we just got the Wi-Fi router the other day, and I go to set it up, ran into a problem, went to call about it, nearly got scammed. And so now I'm just camped out inside of a university building for the podcast until we can get that set up, hopefully a little bit later on today. I'm hoping that your connection situation is a little bit better, but I think we'll at least have a strong audio podcast put together, and we'll see what we can do about this one, Brooks.
Yeah, I think at bare minimum we'll have a good audio podcast. But yeah, like you said, you've been in Bloomington. Indiana football started their fall practices, and, it's fun getting to be around. I was around the Colts training camp the past couple weeks as well, but just that buzz around football, it's kind of coming back. We're in August now, so I'm super excited. I know we've been saying that since we started this last month in July, but, it's kind of feeling like we're only a couple of weeks away, because we are, but that buzz is coming back for sure.
Absolutely. We've got three topics, as always, that we're looking to discuss on this episode. We'll start with IU football, as always. We'll talk about the defensive line additions. I know Brooks has a lot to say about Stephen Daley and Kellan Wyatt. We'll also do a little bit of a fall camp week one recap. I was there at both practices, at least as much of it as I was allowed to see, and then both press conferences. So there's some takeaways from that. We'll look ahead to next week as well. And then slowly but surely, everyone else, every other student besides the athletes, will arrive in Bloomington, and we'll get ready for that first football game on September 5th. We'll talk about Big Ten Media Days. Obviously, we're a little bit late on that, but we'll get back around to some of the storylines there. Brooks and I were at different press conferences. We split up, we divided and conquered, and so we'll kind of share our experiences at some of those individual podiums. And then we'll talk about the coaches poll just for fun. It doesn't matter at all, but it's fun to talk about. We'll talk about some teams that we think are too high, too low, and talk about where Indiana is a little bit later on in the show. Brooks, I'll let you start, though, on the IU football defensive line. Stephen Daley and Kellan Wyatt are back after that class-wide preliminary injunction that clarified that athletes of the 2020 high school class who exhausted their 4-year eligibility last year in 2026, so just had those 4 years, they can retroactively get their fifth after it was pretty much declared that everyone else in college sports has a fifth year. And so 2 IU defensive linemen are back, as well as plenty of other players around the country. It's a big moment. The roster talent at Indiana and everywhere is going to be much better than we previously anticipated on every sport pretty much this coming season because of this rule change, and it certainly impacts IU in a great way. And I'm sure you have plenty to discuss about that, so go ahead.
Yeah, I think with this preliminary injunction, it helps out that class of 2022, but also the class of 2022 with these new 5-5 rules. They were going to be the ones with the short end of the stick. The class of 2021 had that COVID year, and then class of 2023 is getting, that extra fifth year as well. So this injunction gives those guys who, the class of 2022, that extra fifth year, and obviously Indiana taking advantage of that. And there's a lot of outrage around college football. Well, Indiana won this national championship last year with a whole bunch of 24 and 25-year-olds. It might be true, but it happened, and Indiana won. Regardless, they dominated. They would have won if they scored 26 points a game. The defense was that good. Now they add Stephen Daley and Kellan Wyatt back. And remember, Daley went out and got injured celebrating that Big Ten championship game in Indianapolis this past December. So it's good that he gets to come back and he gets to kind of go out on his own terms and ride that wave of the national championship that he wasn't on the field for. So super pumped for Stephen Daley and his family, because I think this is just such a big win for him. And Kellan Wyatt also, put this into perspective, Andrew. These two guys, they wouldn't have had this chance because they most likely would have been in NFL training camps right now. They were that good. They got injured, and now they have to rehab and do whatever, and it doesn't really matter when they see the field in Bloomington, in my opinion, because Indiana has that easy schedule leading up to, obviously, that Week 7 matchup against Ohio State. So, in my opinion, This is a big win for Indiana. Throw out all of the criticism from around the country. They're just hating because Indiana has these two guys who aren't in an NFL training camp right now and can come back to college football.
Absolutely. It's a super weird situation, as you mentioned, where these are NFL level talents. And obviously, it's not like the floodgates are completely open. If you're on an NFL roster, you can't just decide to come back. So it's not like Indiana had any chance of getting Fernando Mendoza or anyone that was drafted or is now in the NFL back. Mikhail Kamara is a great example if you want to look at someone actually on the defensive line. But yeah, you're right. Injured and then obviously didn't get drafted in part because of that. And now they're back, and it's also a strange situation where there's that perfect sweet spot where if you're a team like Ohio State or Texas and you have so much NFL talent leaving every single season, that talent can't come back. But there are going to be teams, that maybe don't quite have that level of blue chip roster talent that have players just graduate and then they're great players in college football, but they're not quite good enough to make the NFL, and then they'll have the opportunity to come back. So I'm interested to see what that does for the middle to lower sections of the Big Ten and college football across the board. But for Indiana in particular, you're right. They retooled thinking that these players at the time, with the knowledge that they had, were going to be gone for good. So they brought in those two Kansas State transfers who are likely going to be awesome. They already returned plenty. They obviously returned plenty already in terms of Mario Landino, Tyreek Tucker, and others. And then you just sprinkle these two on top, both coming off of injury. So it's not complete superpower in adding these two players. But as you mentioned, it looks like they're both going to be very much ready to go and very much 100% at some point. And if nothing else, this would definitely bolster a potential postseason run for Indiana as the season progresses.
Well, depth on the D-line is incredibly important. If you want depth, in my opinion, anywhere on the defensive side of the ball, you would want it to be on the D-line just because of how physical that position is. And Indiana having a cohesive unit, obviously you bring in the transfers like you just mentioned from Kansas State, but also you have, guys who made big plays in big moments like Daniel Ndukwe, who are also going to be on that line. And then obviously Tyreek Tucker, we heard from him at Big Ten Media Days. He's obviously going to be one of the main focal points, potentially one of the best players in the Big Ten defensively, and maybe even in the country, and he's coming back. So the D-line is just outrageously good, and it's insane that they get these guys back. And what Bryant Haynes has already done at Indiana, obviously winning the national championship, but how good that defense was. Again, Indiana could have scored 26 points last year in every single game and won every single game. They were that good defensively. So when these guys slot back into the lineup, it doesn't have to be week one. Indiana will be in a great place defensively. So I think it just gives them a lot of leeway to bring or to decide when to bring Stephen Daley and Kellan Wyatt back. Now, also to talk a little bit more about Indiana in this preliminary injunction, obviously on the basketball side, they bring back Sam Alexis, but I've also been seeing potential reports that Indiana could look to bring back Holden Staes, the tight end from last year. He appeared in all 16 games for the Hoosiers last year. He had a career playing, before at Tennessee and Notre Dame. And if Staes can come back as well, I think that will add more depth into the tight end room that, you and I, we were having our questions about because we don't really know what Brock Schott will bring. So this entire injunction is creating a complete chaos right now in all of college athletics. And I think it just speaks to the fact that the NCAA essentially has as much power right here as this Post-it note. They can't do anything to stop it because these local judges, it's not the first time we've seen it this year, even in this summer. Brendan Sorsby's situation, it comes to my mind instantly, where the NCAA has a ruling and then the school or a player can take that to a local judge and the judge essentially just overrules what the NCAA says. It's not the governing body where you can just say, okay, these rules, we can follow them because everybody breaks these rules. We need to have some type of accountability, some type of system, not to go on too much of a tangent, but I think it's all out of whack right now, and this doesn't make it any easier on the student athletes or the universities themselves. I mean, it's just all crazy right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And Indiana's going to benefit from that crazy. You mentioned how they're not breaking any rules. They're just adapting to the rules in front of them. And even though everyone benefits from these rule changes, it seems like Indiana is going to be one of those programs that benefits the most because, as we mentioned, it has NFL talent that just happen to not end up in the NFL because of forces largely outside of their control. Obviously, it was unfortunate that Wyatt got injured in that Michigan State game and Daley got injured at the end of, while celebrating the Big Ten championship game. They still won a national championship and then get to bring those guys back. So everything's falling in favor of the Hoosiers right now. They got Monsoon Sales. We did that instant reaction podcast a couple weeks ago. They won the national championship. They secured Signetti for a long-term deal. They're bringing these guys back in the short term for this season. They have players in the NFL. Everything's falling in favor of the Hoosiers, and we'll have to see how long that magic can last. We talked about in the past how just because they won a national championship and the season ended doesn't mean the magic is over, and it seems like that magic is clearly very much still alive. So we'll have to see when that runs out, if that runs out. We keep talking about my whole motto, and this isn't an uncommon idea, but the idea that Indiana is, I expect them to go 16-0, win a national championship again, just because I can't imagine Signetti ever losing at anything again in his life. I'll believe it when I see it, that whole, sort of story. And then, but I know I'm wrong. I know it's going to happen. I know that there's a point, obviously, Indiana's not just going to go undefeated for the next 10 years. They're going to lose at some point. It might happen this season, and when that happens, that'd be super fascinating because for the moment, everything is falling in favor of the Hoosiers. And fall camp seems to be going well. I'll transition quickly to just some brief fall camp storylines. Isaiah Jones and Tyreek Tucker both, did the sort of ceremonious yell, rally cry at the beginning of practice, sort of at the end of stretches. We saw Jones do it on the first day, Tucker do it on the second day. We'll see if there's anyone else that comes into that mix. It's just kind of a fun, side piece, I guess, or a sidebar for Indiana fans to kind of take a look at who is stepping into that main leadership role. And Signetti, after practice, seems to be confident about where practice is. Seems like it's flowing well. He said there weren't very many balls on the ground, right? Not very many fumbles or drop passes or just, bad moments. He said there weren't very many major snafus. It seems like practice is flowing well and that Indiana's in a good place and that it's good that all of the players are together because there are some transfers and there's some freshmen, especially that weren't necessarily on campus in the spring, but they now are. And to have everyone together as a group working together to become the team that could be capable of repeating as national champions, this is the start of that. This past week was the beginning of that in full effect. And it seems to be going well so far. Charlie Becker spoke to the media. Elijah Hardy spoke to the media. Becker spoke highly of Hoover. Your guy, Brooks, the offense seems to be in a great spot. Becker had a big line where he essentially said, "Where do you see a hole in the offense?" Right? That was his quote. Just talking about how awesome Hoover is, how awesome the offensive line is, and then he just kept going. He kept naming position groups until there weren't any position groups on offense left to name. And then I guess realized in the moment, wait a second, this offense is perfect. There's no true major flaw. And he alluded to that a little bit at the end of that quote. So it seems like Indiana's not exactly going to start the season slow. I've seen, that video recirculating or the video of, Colton Joseph and his 80-something yard touchdown on the first play of the season last year, just noting how that's how Indiana's season started and look how it finished. And I don't think something like that is necessarily going to happen again. I mean, Taman Jackson, North Texas is a fun team and a cool story, but it seems like Indiana's not exactly going to start slow, and that's great, as you mentioned, Brooks, because they don't need to start fast. They can start slow because of that sort of ramp up and the easy schedule to start with, which some folks down south in the SEC might disagree with. Some folks here in Indiana might appreciate, might support. But either way, that's the fact. That's the situation. That's where Indiana is. And so it seems like they're in a good place for the moment, and we'll see how the rest of the week this week plays out.
And not to go on too much of a tangent here, but you just saying that sparks a little bit of just a light bulb that I've been thinking about the past couple of days. I've been hearing a lot of criticism against Indiana for canceling this Notre Dame series. Again, there needs to be something put in place to say you need to play a Power 4 non-conference opponent. There's nothing in place right now, and playing those games, in my opinion, it doesn't do anything for you. Sure, it's entertaining for the fans. Sure, we would love to see Indiana Notre Dame up in South Bend and Indiana Notre Dame playing at Memorial Stadium. The fans would love it, but what is the incentive? There is no incentive of playing these games right now, and the easy schedule criticism from all over the country, especially from these SEC schools. Every single SEC team, week 11, is playing no disrespect to Samford, but like Samford, they're playing Mercer, they're playing the School for the Blind. It doesn't matter who they're playing because there is no guidelines from the NCAA right now. There is no guidelines from the College Football Playoff Committee. We don't know if an actual tough non-conference schedule does anything to you but hurt you. Imagine this world where Texas doesn't play Ohio State. I saw Steve Sarkisian talk about this. If they don't play Ohio State last year and they're a 2-loss team, do they sneak into the playoffs as a 2-loss Texas? They might. So I don't understand all this criticism because until they change the system, there is no incentive to play a tough non-conference.
Absolutely. And this lets me transition a little bit into something that we'll talk about a little bit later on because we're going to talk about the coaches poll. I have this little resume rankings algorithm that I really love. I made it like 5 years ago for high school football when I was in I guess not 5 years ago, but when I was in middle school, I made this for high school with my dad, who's really smart with spreadsheets and stuff. And I revived it this year for college football. And I'm really excited about it. It's a really simple formula, but it's what I think matters for the college football playoff, which is just straight resume. I don't care about predictive metrics at all. I don't care about roster talent. I just care about what did you do, who did you do it against, where did you do it, by how many points did you do it, right? Those wins and losses, which in theory punishes Texas for losing to Ohio State very, very minimally, and then also on the other side, rewards Indiana for beating Kennesaw State very, very minimally. And so I'm interested to see how it plays out. I'm not too worked up about all this stuff because I want to see how the season plays out, and I know that I'll feel, sort of validated in what I think is right in terms of resume rankings and playoff included teams. We'll put those out on the podcast. We'll do a little playoff predictions or playoff rankings, I guess. Brooks, if you want to, you can set them up. You can set up your bracket however you want to. I'll have my ridiculous rankings algorithm, and we can make some graphics and make some people mad on Twitter on this podcast. But that's the thing about Texas, where and you make a good point about that. You make a good point about the non-conference stuff. I was more upset about Indiana, Virginia getting taken off the board because I have family in Virginia, so family that went to Virginia, so that would be an awesome road trip for me. Notre Dame would also be very, very cool. I'm not ruling out the thought that Indiana and Notre Dame could play in the playoff this year. Those major matchups, I'm just a little bit less concerned about because I know they'll happen in the playoff. Obviously, you still want to see them in the regular season. And obviously, I am still a little disappointed that the non-conference slate is North Texas, Howard, and Western Kentucky this year. And I think next year it's UMass is in there, and I don't remember. Maybe Indiana State or Ball State's coming up in the next few years again. But as you mentioned, those type of schools, very small, not very much of a threat. But it is what it is. I'm more just excited right now about Clemson LSU, which I guess is an example of a game that might not exist in a few years if these scheduling tendencies continue. But even Alabama, Kentucky earlier in the season, those conference matchups, I'm interested. I'm interested to see how all the scheduling stuff plays out. But I'm not super stressed out about it at the moment. Maybe I'm in the wrong for that. I'm definitely in the minority. So Indiana will have that opportunity to really ramp up towards conference play and maybe blow out some lower tier teams before those conference matchups start, and then ultimately ramp up to the playoff, where the Big Ten will have to face the SEC once again. That's what I'm most excited about, is that Big Ten SEC battle. I found it interesting how it's really become a conference, like Ohio State fans, for example, are supporting Cignetti, and Iowa fans are, there's this collective nature of the Big Ten versus the SEC, which I find super fascinating and will really come to a head in the playoff this year. Obviously, Ohio State, Texas, Minnesota, Mississippi State, those are some matchups in the regular season that will have that effect as well. But especially in the playoff, I think it'll be very fun to see play out. Let's talk about Big Ten Media Days. So talk about the Big Ten and SEC clashing a little bit. I'll let you start, Brooks, because you were at some more interesting press conferences. We'll talk about every team other than Indiana right here. I know you saw Ohio State. I know you talked to Dan Lanning. I know you talked to a lot of these guys. I was at a few other press conferences that are a little bit smaller, so I'll go seconds. But yeah, your top takeaways, your top storylines from Big Ten Media Days and the individual podiums that you went to as a representative of the ABCFB podcast.
Well, first, I mean, I went to Oregon and Ohio State, and I wanted to go there, obviously, because they are the best, or two of the three best teams in the Big Ten Conference. Obviously, Indiana's right there with them. And Oregon and Dan Lanning, I feel like, obviously, they come into this year, they returned so many guys. And Dan Lanning, just hearing him talk, I started to think, they had that gritty win in Iowa City last year against Iowa. I know this is kind of random, but this is a team that they're trying to build that toughness factor, and winning there is a big deal. And Dante Moore playing well down the stretch, that's kind of a thing that kind of came up multiple times with Dan Lanning, and building that throughout the entire team. The past 2 years for Oregon, this is also mentioned, they lost to two Big Ten teams in the college football playoff, and they lost in a bad way. The Rose Bowl against Ohio State, they got steamrolled, and then obviously the Peach Bowl, it was even worse for them this past year. So Oregon is trying to not only win another Big Ten championship, but I think they have aspirations for the entire thing for the first time in program history. And obviously you want to say that every single year if you're Dan Lanning. But I think they have the pieces in place. Returning a quarterback, in my opinion, and we'll talk about this when we go to the coaches poll, returning a starting quarterback is far more valuable than anything you can bring in the transfer portal or new high school recruits. Returning starters in general, but returning a starting quarterback. And Oregon has that. Ohio State has that. So those were common themes I saw from Ryan Day and Dan Lanning when they were talking. Switching it over to Ohio State, I talked to Julian Sayin and to Ryan Day, and Julian Sayin seems like he has a good head on his shoulders. If you ever have heard him talk, he's not very much of a talkative guy. He's very monotone and likes to keep to himself. So we didn't really get a ton other than he loves his receivers around him. And he has a ton of good talent. Ohio State football year in and year out. They bring in two freshmen that I think might see the field this year, Chris Henry Jr. and Brock Boyd from Texas. So they have the recruits there coming in. They also have the returners and potentially the best, in my opinion, the best player in college football, Jeremiah Smith, also coming back for Ohio State. So they're going to be fine. They do have a gauntlet, and that's kind of what Ryan Day talked about is when you have to play that many teams, Ohio State's going to be battle-tested by the time they show up in the college football playoff because they have already seen the likes of Texas, they've seen Oregon, they've seen Indiana. And when you have to run the table like that, especially in a conference like the Big Ten, it's only going to help you down the line. So I know I just talked a ton, but those were kind of like the big hitters from both of those press conferences. I do believe in Oregon this year, and I really liked what I heard from Dan Lanning as well.
Great. Yeah, I had some smaller ones. I first want to mention I didn't actually go to any direct Northwestern press conferences on the individual podiums because that's when Indiana was going as well, which is also why we both completely missed Michigan because we were focused on our Indiana players. Obviously, and coaches. Obviously, we cover Indiana for the Hoosier Network here in Bloomington. But Northwestern at the podium originally in the opening statement, some great confidence from Northwestern. Basically just repeating a mantra of why not Northwestern, right? We just saw Indiana do all these things. We saw head coach David Braun go up and say make a lot of statements about how Northwestern, with its new stadium, is potentially at least capable of putting something together. So maybe it won't happen this year, but this whole why not Northwestern mentality that we saw at Big Ten Media Days at least caught my eye, at least caught my ear. I know I was walking past. I went to go get another coffee, and I was walking past you, Brooks, and then a lot of our friends in IU Sports Media while this was happening, while he was saying, why not Northwestern? Big Ten Championship, why not Northwestern? National Championship, why not Northwestern? And I just saw...
Caught my ear for sure.
Yeah,
Surprised me.
I know I gave you a look. I think you gave me a look, just people giving each other looks of like, wow, like that, I'm no disrespect, no hate. It's just like, oh, didn't necessarily have that on the bingo card. Just like how with Cignetti, not everything was on the bingo card entering certain press conferences. So I just thought I'd note that for people that may not have seen it, because I know not everyone's watching Big Ten Network for the Northwestern opening statements, understandably so. Minnesota, I talked to PJ Fleck. I just love PJ Fleck. I knew that's why I was there. He was the first one. So you went to Oregon. You camped out outside Dan Lanning, and we strategized this. You camped out outside Dan Lanning. I hit PJ Fleck, and then he was right next to Dante Moore, so I could just hop over to Dante Moore when I was ready and still hear what PJ Fleck was saying. So that was a perfect situation, and I knew I would love PJ Fleck. I was right. He was in a great mood, very talkative. Spoke a lot about recruiting and development and trying to foster loyalty, even in the era of NIL and the transfer portal, and he advertised Minnesota as a place to sort of set up a life, right, and set yourself up for the future rather than just get some money. And about how Minnesota is still getting good recruits that way, trying to develop them, trying to keep them in-house. And so Minnesota returns a ton of production this season, and I think that's worth noting. If I remember correctly, they're 7th in returning production in the country. So there's something there. And I don't know exactly if that'll manifest itself in any particular way. Minnesota also has a gauntlet where they play a lot of great teams at home and on the road. If they spring an upset over one of them, I don't think I'm definitely less. I definitely would be less surprised than I would be before Big Ten Media Days, or I would have been before Big Ten Media Days and before talking to PJ Fleck, because that was super interesting to hear about, just sort of his whole approach and how happy he is with the construction of his roster and where Minnesota is. So that was fun and interesting, and a great first press conference there on that second day of Big Ten Media Days, but our first day there in Chicago. Then sat for the whole Dante Moore press conference. I just love the way he speaks. I love his entire presence. He came back rather than going to the NFL. He's ready for another run. I love Oregon. I mostly just love Dan Lanning and Dante Moore, which obviously are the faces of the team at the moment, faces of the program to some degree. So Oregon is scary. I'm really looking forward to. I'm going to write about Oregon. I'm in the middle of writing about Oregon on my personal Substack, Garrison's Gradient. Go subscribe. And I'm loving it. I'm just really enjoying delving into this Oregon roster and figuring out what's going on. Because, they're number 2 in the Coaches Bowl, which we'll talk about. They're very high in the FanDuel odds to win the national title. They're very high in FPI as well. So I'm just intrigued. I'm interested by this Oregon team. And I know, obviously, you talked about Dan Lanning. I was there for Dante Moore, and that was fun as well. He's just very, very humble, very composed, very poised, and very clear-headed, I think. And I think that he's going to be a great leader for this team once again, and will certainly bounce back from that Peach Bowl performance and potentially take that team all the way to the national championship. I need to start thinking, maybe our next episode next week, we should have a topic about just Big Ten championship predictions and how the Big Ten's going to shake out, or Big Ten record predictions even. We can just predict every Big Ten team's season. I'd love that, because this whole battle with Oregon, Indiana, Ohio State, maybe Michigan, maybe Penn State randomly at the top, USC sneakily, Washington, battle between all those teams at the top, I think is going to be super, super fascinating. And I think right now, I'm not going to say anything out loud in terms of assessments of Oregon, but I'll save that for next episode when I have more time to think about it. But not surprised at all if they win the Big Ten championship and go undefeated. Not surprised at all if they win the national championship, perhaps, or at least make it there. And the way Dante Moore spoke certainly reinforced that idea. Before we get to the Coaches Bowl, any other takeaways from Big Ten Media Days? I know we had a lot of fun in Chicago while we were there.
I know this segment really isn't Indiana focused, but I did really enjoy Curt Cignetti's opening statement when he just got up there. And we all know Sig by this point. He's the smug guy. He says whatever's on his mind. He's not afraid of anybody, which I love that for Sig. I love that for the Indiana football program, especially after years and years and years of being the bottom feeder in the Big Ten. So Curt Cignetti going up there and saying, we know it's expected, or our program knows what's expected of them, and all we do is win. Like, as a coaching staff, all we do is win. That gets you fired up. That also, I look down at my watch. I'm like, okay, only a couple more weeks until we get to see this on the field. So that is kind of what was happening, because I was camping out at Curt Cignetti's individual podium, which he was going to right after. So I heard that caught my eye, And it's just, again, another Curt Cignetti quote to add to the long list of them that he's had here in Bloomington.
Yeah, a great time. Curt Cignetti, as always. Let's move on to our C block. Let's talk about the coaches poll and some reactions to the coaches poll. First of all, Indiana is at 6. Unsurprisingly, a little bit low. There's obviously a lot of great teams at the top ranked above Indiana. Indiana is the reigning national champion, not necessarily a known college football brand. What's your reaction, Brooks, to Indiana being at number 6?
I don't love it. In my opinion, Indiana should be number 5. If I was going to rank them, and I think we should do this on another show as well, but it would be, I like the top 3. I really do. Ohio State, Oregon, Georgia. I like that. I would actually throw Notre Dame at 4. I do think Notre Dame has a good roster this year. They have a fairly easy schedule other than when they welcome Miami to South Bend. Indiana, in my opinion, is the 5th best team. Coaches poll, not going to read too much into it. If Indiana is lower when the rankings come out, again, it doesn't really matter. Curt Cignetti, nobody's actually looking at these. It's, the preseason polls. But Indiana should not be lower than 5. They just won the national championship. Like we've talked about the entire episode, they're returning a lot of people. They're returning a lot of guys. I think it's very easy to look at, okay, well, they're losing the Heisman Trophy winner. They're losing the number 1 overall pick. Surratt's gone. Omar Cooper Jr.'s gone. Defensively, D'Angelo Pons is gone. Mikal Kamara and Aiden Fisher. But they return almost all of the offensive line other than Pat Coogan. And then I think that's super important. And then you have all of these guys who they replaced in the transfer portal. You have, Stephen Daley, Kellan, Wyatt coming back. You have a linebacking room, which I really trust in, Isaiah Bones-Jones and Elijah Hardy. So, those two guys, they just won the national championship. They've seen it. There's a standard at Indiana. Indiana should be the 5th best team in the country right now in a poll. And they have the ceiling to, again, like you mentioned, I don't want to pick against Indiana until I get burned. And I made that call after the Big Ten championship game last year. Very similar to what you've already said. Those are things that I've just been thinking for the longest time since then because I don't want to get burned. With that, Indiana has all the production. They have all the pieces. They have all the tools. They have all the resources. They have all the coaches. And they have the players to go and win another national championship. They should not be lower than 5. And Texas, in my opinion, is ranked too high.
Gotcha. So so we had our next stretch, and you made some great points there. It's also just difficult because there's so many great teams towards the top. I think you make some great points about Indiana. A team too low and a team too high. I don't want to just kind of completely drag this coaches poll through the mud because obviously it's just the coaches poll. It's almost supposed to be, a little bit less involved than the AP poll or anything else, any computer rankings. So I just as for talking points, a team too low and a team too high. Sounds like you think Texas is too high. Let's start with teams too low. I went with Notre Dame, which is also similar to what you just said about that team. I just I pretty much in a similar way of what you just said. I just basically would put Notre Dame over Texas. I would consider Notre Dame over Georgia as well. FPI strangely has Texas at number 2. For whatever that's worth, Notre Dame at 3, and then Indiana back down at 6 there as well. So kind of the exact opposite of what you think it should be. Notre Dame, I only said too low because I think they should be 4 instead of 5. Obviously, that's an unfair criticism. That's a really close margin. Both teams are great, but Notre Dame also returns a lot. They also return their quarterback. They also have a great coaching staff situation, lose both running backs, but seem to be retooling in a decent way there. And so you can make an argument. I mean, just both Notre Dame and Texas are two teams that narrowly missed the playoff. So with them being right next to each other, I just feel more confident. Maybe it's just because I know more about Notre Dame, but I just feel more confident in what CJ Carr and Notre Dame have going on compared to what Texas has going on the other side. I struggle to put Notre Dame much lower than 3, to be honest. They're at 5 right now. I'll say they're the team that I have too low. My team too high is Oklahoma, just slightly. Again, it's really hard. It's hard to disagree with rankings that don't matter and don't mean anything because we haven't seen anything actually play out. But Oklahoma, I put too high, partially just because I love Ole Miss and Trinidad Chambliss, and I think out of all those SEC teams in that bunch, right? Because we see Georgia and Texas at 3 and 4, and then it's Texas A&M at 8, Oklahoma at 9, Ole Miss at 10, Alabama at 11, and then LSU at 13. Out of all of the teams in that chunk, the one that I just maybe trust the least is Oklahoma. Alabama could be in that list as well, but they're one of those unpredictable teams. So I had suggested that perhaps Oklahoma could slip down a few spots outside of number 9, but also, again, that's just because I love Ole Miss, and I think that team is going to be poised to be a great one. So that's perhaps one that I could say is a little bit too low, but I went with Notre Dame. Do you have any differences there? I know you said Texas is one of those teams that's too high. Do you have anyone else? What's your reaction to the rankings as a whole?
Yeah, it's all very marginal though. Texas is a great team. Texas is going to be battle tested. Again, trying not to read too much into this. I actually think a team that's ranked too low is USC at 14. And I know that might surprise people, but I'm higher on the Big Ten than most SEC schools. I think Alabama being ranked at 11, considering what we saw, the product on the field that we saw the last time they were out there in the Rose Bowl. I think, obviously you have this quarterback battle going on right now in Tuscaloosa, and I assume it's probably going to lean Austin Mack over Kellan Russell, but we'll see in the next couple of weeks. But again, I value that returning quarterback. And Jade Maeva, I was very, very impressed with him, what he was able to do down the stretch for the Trojans. So I probably would jump up USC. I would flip-flop USC and Alabama, and that's just my opinion right there. So have USC as the 11th best team in the country and have Alabama as the 14th best team in the country. Again, coaches poll, can't read too much into it, but I think that there's 8 Big Ten teams in this coaches poll. There's 8 SEC teams in this coaches poll, and those are the 2 heavyweights in college football. So you're obviously going to have most of the 25 be from those 2 conferences, but I feel very confident in the upper echelon of the Big Ten, and that's been the criticism against the Big Ten is they're very top-heavy. They don't have the teams in the middle, and you asked a great question to Kurt Signetti about that at Media Days, but the middle of the Big Ten, especially with the NIL and, Washington starting to get some – Washington made it to the national championship a couple of years ago, but Washington, Penn State, Iowa, there are contenders at the bottom half of this top 25 list that I think could actually make a run at the Big Ten championship game. Depends on their schedule. It depends on if they can get hot at the right time. So USC ranked too low in my opinion.
Gotcha. Yeah, and for the record, the top 6, they all received first-place votes. Indiana actually received the second most first-place votes, which is curious because there's 6 out of that 6. So I wonder how low some of these coaches put Indiana on this list. I guess that's a lot of disbelief in Josh Hoover or doubts in the roster across the board. Ohio State got 38 first-place votes, Oregon 6, Georgia 7, Texas 2, Notre Dame 5, Indiana 14, and then everyone else slots in behind them. I have one idea real quick, just because I think this is fun. I was looking at this. I didn't put this in the prep. This is a surprise to you. But I was just thinking before the podcast, how many teams can you count down the list? This is an imperfect process because there are teams that are probably underrated that are national championship contenders. But my question to you is, how far down do you get on the list before you see a team that you don't think can win the national championship? I did this little exercise with this and then with FPI as well. So obviously Ohio State, Oregon, where do you get when you don't see a national champion?
Honestly, just because the way that college football has gone with the new expanded playoff, I think there are teams who can make a run, but true national championship contenders, I cut the list off at 7. I think, which might be too low. Granted, there probably are 12 teams who could win the college football playoff and take home the national championship trophy. But I see 7 true contenders where right now in August, I look at them and I know that they could contend. And it's Ohio State, Oregon, Indiana, Notre Dame, Georgia, Texas, and Miami. Those are the 7, and those are obviously the top ranked 7 ranked teams right there. But I think there is a gap, in my opinion. There is a gap between the upper echelon of the Big Ten and everyone else. Notre Dame's a weird one because they're not in the conference, but Ohio State, Oregon, Indiana, any of those 3 teams, I am more confident in than a Georgia, a Texas, a Miami, and even a Notre Dame. I am more confident in the Big Ten teams, especially in the college football playoff, because we've seen it the past 3 years. And honestly, I'm going to say we're probably going to see it for a 4th straight year. I believe in Oregon. I believe in Ohio State. And you bet your ass I believe in Indiana.
Some great quotes right there from Brooks Wyatt on the ABCFB podcast as well. The Coaches Poll is great for this because, as you mentioned, Ohio State, Oregon, top 2, then Georgia, Texas. So you have that kind of separation between the top of the Big Ten and the SEC. Notre Dame slotting in somewhere. Got that ACC team in Miami as well. And when I wrote it down, I included Texas A&M in that list, and then I cut it off at Oklahoma. FPI is better because Alabama is so high, and I cut it off before Alabama, and that cutoff is the same 7 that you just listed. So it's just a fun exercise because these rankings obviously aren't ours, so we don't necessarily agree with where everyone stacks up. So it's fun to get to a point. And, LSU is at 13 in the Coaches Poll, so there's a world where you could totally fairly consider that team a national championship contender, or even Texas Tech. And then, if there's a team that you don't think is a championship contender ahead of them, then that ruins the whole thing. Or if you're a major doubter of Texas, for example, then your list is only 3 teams long. It's just a fun thought exercise that kind of hit my brain that'll be interesting to see when we get to the AP poll and as the season progresses as well. That is all we have for this episode of the ABCFB podcast. We'll be back next week, Sunday. This episode's coming out on Sunday, and that's a good benchmark for how these episodes are going to come out in the future. At least, we've obviously got to figure it out a little bit. We'll have travel involved as we, traverse the country for these IU games. But for the most part, we'll watch college football on Saturday, and then on Sunday evenings, we'll do this podcast. Week 1 will be interesting and weird, though, because they play big games on Sunday and Monday. So we're going to have to figure that out. But obviously, there's still a little bit of time until then. I was devastated yesterday, Brooks, because I was, looking in my calendar. Oh, you know what I was doing? I was putting the IU football fall camp things in my calendar. And inexplicably, somehow, I made the mistake of putting, I blocked off a Saturday for week 0, 7 a.m. noon to midnight, right? Blocked off week 0, accidentally put week 0 as August 22 instead of August 29. And this whole time just thought college football started a week earlier than it does, and was devastated when I checked and it wasn't the case. Yeah.
Right in the heart. That hurts. That hurts real bad.
A real rough one. Because I was counting it down. I was like, wow, we're going to run out of episodes before we get to, this is great. We're almost here. And we'll have a whole nother week to just think about college football instead of actually watching it. But once it arrives, that will obviously be a very exciting point in the calendar. And yeah, that's all we have to say about that. So we appreciate you all for watching. We appreciate you all for listening. Hopefully the connection works okay. Hopefully you could see my mouth move throughout this entire episode if you were watching on YouTube. Otherwise, you enjoy the still image that has lasted throughout the duration of it. And we'll talk to you all next time.